Okay, so think about your objective. Is there some kind of problem that you're trying to solve? And we'll talk a little bit about just now about significance and contribution. But when you think about what it is that you want to study, you're going to have the broad field within which you want to read and make a contribution. But you probably have some idea of where there are issues, and maybe it's something that you've understood from the world and you want to answer with academic research and then make a contribution back into the world, or perhaps something in the literature has identified potentially that there's a gap and that you think solving that gap in the literature is going to make a contribution to knowledge. So defining what you're going to put in your study makes you link your work with the world of the reader. And when you write that introduction to the proposal, you're bringing the context of the real world into academia, and then you're drilling deeper and deeper down. And as we spoke about just now, again, you've got to get down to some narrow problem statements, some narrow objectives that you want to accomplish with your study, a very well-defined thesis statement. So those are all some things that you need to think about. One of the things that I was actually criticized in my final report of my PhD was, insufficient definition of key concepts. So very important that early on in your proposal, you define key concepts. So, this is again about avoiding jargon and making your work, accessible for people. It's mostly going to be read in an academic context, but there will be a handful of key concepts that, if you don't set them up front, people are going to get into work and start to get confused. So that, I certainly feel is very important. And then let's just talk then about a good thesis statement, because I think, this is an exercise that you should do. And the folk who've mentioned that they've got, proposals due and are registering in the next couple of months, etc. I would say this is the one thing that you need to do. Go and, follow through this whiteboard lesson in the course, where I take an example as I've got there, and I've drawn a boundary around that as an example of a thesis statement. And it must really answer the question, what will you investigate? So you want to investigate a statement. You want to then be able to apply methods and research discipline and your time and effort and the support of your institution to find out more about that investigation. To find out more about that topic through some rigorous academic investigation. And so, that thesis statement, as I've got there on the flip chart, it needs to be a single statement, and it needs to be unambiguous. So the one that I've written there, and in the lesson I go through it, it's very specific. It can't be misinterpreted. It can be tested. It's got limited scope. And also, very importantly, and this talks to the thing that we mentioned earlier, you're going to have, honors, masters, PhD, and your thesis statement is going to also be guided by how much time and energy you've got to spend on doing this investigation. And that's, again, where your supervisors will guide you in terms of what, level you're doing your proposal at. And again, that was the scale, the topic that I mentioned. And when you get to a PhD, obviously, you're going to have 3, 4, 5 years of your life in which you can, spend, and will be the time frame of your investigation for that thesis statement. And again, it must talk to, a time aspect, when, how, who. It must be very focused. It must be linked to your area of interest. A thesis statement is something that may be very topical now, but might not be topical in 3 years, or it might not be so topical now, but it could be topical in 3 years' time. Imagine people who had written thesis statements 3 years ago to try and, address, COVID or whatever we knew about it by then. Suddenly, that research becomes incredibly important and helps the world develop vaccines. And you've got to understand the cyclical nature of the importance and the interest, the level of interest that you have in that thesis statement. But writing a good thesis statement, I think, is going to be one of the most important things that you do in terms of defining the what of your proposal. Okay, so spend some time going through that, and I would really suggest doing an exercise at home, as part of getting your proposal done. Write up that thesis statement and then test it. Test that thesis statement. So ask somebody, could it be misinterpreted? Ask somebody whether they think it could be done within an honors or a master's or a PhD. Ask somebody if they think that you are deeply invested and passionate in that topic, and whether it's going to continue being relevant, over the next few years. So that thesis statement is going to act like a North Star. It's going to help you get through your studies successfully, and very important that you do that very well. And I think, action that you can take out of the session, so those of you that, have got pressing deadlines, is, either go into your proposal, or as part of writing a proposal in those earlier sections, the introduction, etc., do you have that thesis statement? Are you able to write that down? And I've just put a link there to the Facebook group. Put a thesis statement in the Facebook group and test it with us and say, guys, this is my thesis statement. Do you think it's clear enough? Do you think it's, focused enough? And do you think it's going to be, suitable at a certain level? So get input on that. But of course, most importantly, your supervisors, your institutions, etc. And then to those of you that are sort of registering or needing to confirm a topic, with your institution, etc., this is often a good subtitle or a secondary explanation of what it is that you're doing in your research. And you may need to answer this before you're actually ready with your proposal, but usually the university will then ask you to confirm that topic and the sort of subtext of your topic, once you've been through a proposal presentation. But that thesis statement is going to really help you, certainly in terms of the paperwork and the process as you're going through the early stages of getting ready with your proposal submission process, etc. Okay, and then I'm just going to put the link here to the podcast, so hop on there, subscribe, and pick up the latest episode with the professor that I interviewed from Wits University. And he talks there quite a bit about postgraduate life and how you should approach your studies, and certainly in a disrupted post-COVID world, I think that's going to be very important for us. Okay, so we've dealt with the what, and if you do a good job in your proposal, in terms of the what, there's a lot in that introduction and the context and the background reading and the problem statements and the key concepts, etc., that you can actually then use to put into your final report. Okay, I'm just going to deal with this question. Is a thesis statement and a concept not the same thing? It's not the same thing. So a key concept is something that's part of your studies. So let's say, I'll take my example, I was studying agile software engineering in large organizations. So a key concept there would be to define what is a large organization. So in your thesis statement, you'll talk about concepts. If you look at the one on the board there, peanut butter sandwiches are effective for reducing hunger in tennis players, okay, as an example. So you'll need to define what's a peanut butter sandwich, and I'm being simplistic here. But a thesis statement will have some concepts in it. So you'll have a thesis statement in your proposal. You'll discuss it and go through it and present it and highlight it as your thesis statement. But there'll be some concepts in your thesis statement that you need to define. So elsewhere in your proposal, you'll have a section, and you'll see it when you go through the course, and I take you through my proposal and my final report, in actual fact, you'll see a section that says key concepts. So you would define then, like I did in my study, what is agile software engineering? What is a large organization? What is grounded theory potentially? Although you would do a bit more definition on that in the methodology section. So people aren't going to be able to understand a thesis statement if you introduce key concepts that may be misinterpreted or may need additional level of understanding. So I hope that that cleared that up. And again, in the course, you'll actually see my documents and you'll be able to go through it.